Good afternoon and very welcome to the Wood Be Better Network. My name is Anna Holmberg. I represent the Swedish forest industries and I have the pleasure of being your moderator today. Our focus this afternoon is on using wood as a decisive contribution in greening our buildings. And why have we chosen this topic? Because using wood, whether it's for extensions, new builds or renovation, it's right at the center of EU policy discussions at the moment. And to remind ourselves of how hot a topic this is, let's go back to September of last year and listen to the words of the President of the European Commission.
The second example are the buildings we live and work in. Our buildings generate more than 40% of our emissions. They need to become less wasteful, less expensive, and more sustainable. And we know that the construction sector can even be turned from a carbon source into a carbon sink if organic building materials like wood and smart technologies like AI are being used. So I want Next Generation EU to kickstart a European renovation wave and make our union a leader in the circular economy. And this is why we will set up a new European Bauhaus, a co-creation space where architects, artists, students, engineers, designers work together to make that happen. This is Next Generation EU. This is shaping the world we want to live in. A world served by an economy that cuts emission, boosts competitiveness, reduces energy poverty, creates rewarding jobs, and improves quality of life.
We reach you from a broadcasting studio in Stockholm, Sweden, and I can assure you all arrangements are fully in line with prevailing Swedish corona restrictions. More than 280 have registered for this event, and you come from more than 20 countries around Europe. Thank you so much for choosing to spend part of this afternoon together with us. And together with me here in the studio is Lennart Axell from the Federation of the Swedish Family Forest Owners. Hello, Lennart.
Hi, hello.
What are your expectations for this afternoon?
The expectations from the smallholders on today's discussion on wood building's contribution to various EU policies. It's really time to make that much more visible. It's great to know that all of you are part of our discussion on wood building, which is very much linked to the climate ambitions we have. But it's important to note that this prime processing of harvested wood, the sawn timber, the sawn logs, also provides with the side streams to pulp and paper, to wood-based textiles, to biofuels for the transport sector, as well as heating and electricity, all in the renewable green carbon cycle, all in the value chain of harvested wood.
Indeed. And can you, to the audience, can you please explain what is the Wood Be Better network?
Wood Be Better is arranged jointly by the Swedish forest industries and the Federation of Swedish Family Forest Owners. Each network's event is hosted by a Swedish member of the European Parliament. Presently, the network has 3 hosts from different political groups. The network aims to be an arena where we jointly can increase our knowledge about the forest-based sector and its role in relevant EU decision-making processes.
Thank you, Lennart. And before we kick things off, a little bit of information on practicalities. If you are active on social media, please include the hashtag WoodBeBetter. And if you want to pose a question to any of the speakers, you can do so by logging on to menti.com using the code that you see in front of yourself. Please state your name, affiliation, and the question. And it's Lennart here who's going to keep track of the inflow of questions, and we'll do our very best to accommodate as many of them as possible. Today's host is Erik Bergqvist. Erik is a member of European Parliament since 2019, and he belongs to the Socialists and Democrats, i.e. the S&D Group. Erik is a member of the Parliament's Committee for Regional Development and a substitute in the committees for Budgets and Industry, Research and Energy. Erik is with us via link today, so I'll say hello, Erik. How are you?
Hello, Anna. I'm fine. How are you?
I am fine as well. Can you please tell us where in the European map are you today?
Well, I'm in my hometown, Umeå, 600 kilometers north of Stockholm. It's very snowy and the trees are covered in beautiful white snow. So it's like going out into a fairy tale when you go outside.
Well, that sounds exotic indeed, I think, for quite many of our participants today. So, Erik, without any further ado, the digital floor is yours for your opening address, please.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you for this opportunity. For a little more than a year ago, I was asked to be one of the hosts for the Would Be Better network. I asked what it was, and when I understood what it was, I immediately accepted. Because it felt very natural to me, because forest has always been a part of my life. I was basically born in the middle of the forest, or at least in a small village in the inland of my region, surrounded by forests. We played in the forests, we swam in the forest lakes, we built tree houses, we played hide and seek. Sometimes we got a little lost as well. So it was very natural. My first summer job was to plant a forest. We were 10 young people, about 1,000 plants each person a day, meaning we planted about 10,000 trees. In a week, it was 50,000 trees. In a month, it was 200,000 a week. And when the summer was over, we had planted more than 500,000 trees. Today, 50 years later, when I pass these areas, I can see that it's actually become a wood of pine and sometimes of other wood sorts, but mostly pine. Beautiful, big forests. So for me, it's been natural to be close to the forest, but also that forest is something that is useful for us. It makes our lives better. And if we take care and see through it that new forest is planted, then of course, forest and we can coexist in a very, very good way. We also did a lot of things for the forest. Tree houses was common, it is common. And today we don't just build 2 stories or 3 stories, but like in my region, we build skyscrapers. Right now, a theater is being built more than 20 stories high, and also parking houses and all that other kind of things. And no one could imagine, at least not me, that a parking house could be beautiful. But this in wood, and especially in the evening when the facade lights are on, it's really, really beautiful. So building in forests now, and I'm really glad about this timing and how things are developing now, that we don't just build low houses, we can build high houses, we can build wide houses, and it creates job, it creates cunning, and it has a more than double effect on nature, that we can substitute materials that emit carbon. Instead, we can use wood that actually keeps the carbon, and we have new forest growing that will actually absorb even more carbon. So it's just advantages to building in forestry, besides being very, very beautiful. And it, of course, also increases our knowledge and our resilience, because wood, forest is something that we have access to. It's not very hard, it's not very complicated to use these kinds of things. So I'm very glad that we have this network, that we can inform about forestry, the Scandinavian way of doing forestry, the use we have of it, and also that we now will fit in perfectly in the European Bauhaus and also in the renovation wave. So forest is a living material, and I'm convinced that it will give us in Europe also a better chance to live better lives. Welcome to this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erik. And you will come back at the end of the seminar and share your main takeaways. It's now time to turn to our 3 speakers. They will each make short presentations, and then we will bring in questions, hopefully from you in the audience. And after the presentations, I will moderate a policy-oriented discussion with all three panelists. I remind you once again that you can post questions using menti.com and the code that you see on the screen in front of you. Our first speaker today is Mr. Peter Handley. Peter is Head of Unit for Energy-Intensive Industries and Raw Materials at the part of the European Commission, which is often abbreviated DG GROW. They are responsible for questions relating to internal market, industry, entrepreneurship, and SMEs. Hello, Peter.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the event today. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it's great to have you. And tell us, are you in Brussels or elsewhere in Europe at the moment?
I'm in Brussels. Like Eric, I'm working out of my home. This is my second Swedish day of the week. Yesterday, I was involved in an event about mining in northern parts of Sweden with a report being presented by the OECD. So now I switch to forests and forest-based products, but still Swedish-focused.
Well, that's great to hear. I'm going to leave the digital floor to you, Peter, straight away for your presentation. So please go ahead.
Thank you. I had some slides, actually. I don't know if I can ask someone to put them up.
Well, they are up on the screen as we speak.
Okay. Well, I'm working from my telephone, so I don't see what you have on the screen, but I will fly blind. So one of the things I do in my job is also I chair the Forest-Based Industries Expert Group. So I bring together all sorts of stakeholders, and these include sectors that grow trees, private and public sector forest organizations, but also all the sectors that use products that come out of the forest. So I really enjoy working in this area because it's extremely dynamic, and it couldn't be more on message with the European Green Deal. Anyway, so the first slide I have is about construction in Europe. And you see there the quotation we've just heard from the President of the European Commission. I think the underlying issue we have here is that collectively we are consuming at least 2 planet Earths, and we only have one. So everything needs to change in the way that we use resources on the planet. And Europe has a particular responsibility as an advanced consuming region of the world. And we can see, as the President has said, that if in the past the construction sector and the built environment has been a major source of greenhouse gas emissions, we have to seize the opportunity to turn it into becoming part of the solution in terms of capturing for long periods of time the carbon and preventing it from escaping into the atmosphere. And as she said, there is a key role here for organic building materials like wood. She mentioned it explicitly. I don't need to mention to you that construction is a major part of the European economy. According to our data, 22 million direct jobs in around 5 million companies. So it's a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises, and almost 8% of Europe's GDP. What we're doing in the new Commission is try to develop the concept of industrial ecosystems. So this is much more than the classic individual sectorial approach to industrial policy. And it's more than the value chain. It's really where products and services come together, where large and small enterprises, including startups, come together, where the research network that surrounds industry is part of the solution, and where we need to engage with actors such as regions and national governments, as well as with civil society. So if you could please move on to the next slide about the renovation wave. Eric has already referred to it. This is something we launched last October, as announced in the President's State of the Union speech in September. It's one of the 7 flagships of the EU recovery package, because we see that we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, thanks to the recovery funds, to accelerate work in Europe, transforming its economy to become green, digital, and more resilient. And renovation, along with hydrogen and other things, are identified as areas where we see a real priority and where we're hoping that member states will put really good investments in their national recovery plans. So the renovation wave is seeking to at least double the annual rate of building renovation to retrofit some 35 million building units over the coming decade. This is essentially moving from a 1% renovation rate to at least 2%. And we think it'll be a major creator of jobs, at least 160,000 jobs. But it will require huge investments, and that's where we need to tap into all the various European funds that can be made available for this. The renovation wave also includes an action plan. So we'll be revisiting various pieces of European legislation this year. That includes the Energy Efficiency Directive, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, and we will also be working on the effort sharing decision and the land use change rules as part of the raising of our climate ambition to 55% by 2030. Right, if you could move to the next slide, please. Bauhaus, you've heard the president speak. This is an attempt to really reach out to something which connects with European citizens, something which is real, because there's nothing more real than the places we live and work in. And inspired by a very interesting piece of research that came out of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. She was very much inspired when she was looking around for ideas for her State of the Union speech, very much inspired by the ideas of turning the built environment into a massive carbon sink, but something that also contributes in a big way to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improving the quality of life for people where they live and work, and also bringing together much more circular economy. You know, if you look at the original Bauhaus, a lot of it was about making good things out of waste products. So the recycling, the circularity is a big part of this, but also getting outside just the straightforward, like industrial kind of approach and bringing in other actors. So architects, designers, engineers, young people, all sorts of interdisciplinary work, social sciences, all this thing needs to come together with the objective of really giving a massive boost to the renovation wave, to how we conceive new build in future, and to try and make sure that we do what we're good at in Europe, which is being creative, being artistic, seeing how things join up. We're very good at integrating things in Europe. So if we can go to the next slide, it's going to proceed in steps. So obviously step 0 was to announce the initiative, which happened last autumn. And just earlier this month, some of the details in the plan were published. So step 1 is really to think about design and to reach out to stakeholders, come up with ideas. So my main message to you from today's event is really think about what you as a network can bring to the table for the new European Bauhaus. What ideas can you bring? What good designs can you bring? Can you bring forward some candidates for the prize, which will be coming out in a few months' time? We want to have at least 5 major Bauhaus projects spread around Europe, which can deliver real results in the next few years. And we think this can really contribute to the European Green Deal in a very real way. Next slide is on research and innovation. Here, there's various parts of the new Horizon Europe program which I think are extremely relevant to you. First of all, we have Cluster 4, which is dealing with industry, circularity, digital and space, and where we really think that there's a lot to do to make industries, including the construction industry, and materials, so things like wood, cement, steel, other products that are used in construction, much more sustainable and much more circular. And in Cluster 5 of Horizon Europe, we will have a particular focus on the built environment. There will be a co-programmed partnership between the EU and member states called Built for People, which will take a whole value chain approach to the sustainable built environment. And then lastly, Cluster 6 of Horizon Europe will have an institutional partnership called Circular Bioeconomy in Europe, and that will take a look at research and innovation actions on bio-based construction materials and products. And here we see a lot of innovation in the wood space, even some products which can substitute for glass if you look at transparent wood. And then all the new uses of wood in the high-rise buildings, for example, which has already been referenced. There's endless potential for using cellulose from the forests in a much more innovative way than we have in the past. But we think also that some of this Bauhaus and renovation wave can also be about rediscovering things we knew and did well in the past and which we've rather lost sight of in the last few decades. Next slide, please. France is intending to introduce a new piece of environmental legislation on new build, which is designed to set greenhouse gas emission requirements to limit the carbon footprint of new buildings and their components. As such, we do not have any kind of problem at the European level with high levels of ambition about what sort of performance you expect from whether it's a car or a building, or indeed from a big industry like steel or chemicals. But we have a little bit of a problem about being very specific in terms of which kind of products or technologies are the only ones that will fulfill the requirements. So we are a little bit watching the French initiative with a lot of interest at the moment, because we do think that technology neutrality is an extremely important principle, but we do also understand that organic materials such as wood can deliver many of these performance benefits that are needed. My last slide is about the forest strategy, which we announced under the European Green Deal. This is designed to build on our recent biodiversity strategy. It will cover the whole forest cycle and promote services that forests can provide. So it'll contribute to our climate goals, hopefully to jobs, circular bioeconomy, and contribute to sustainable management of forests. Just a few days ago, the Commission's Joint Research Centre published a report on the use of forest biomass for energy production. I'm sure many of you will have seen that. This will be helping us to put together some of the proposals that we have in preparation this year, such as the Renewable Energy Directive and the Emission Trading Scheme and LULUCF, as I mentioned before. And our forest strategy is coming out later this year, following the public consultation, which is currently underway and closes on the 19th of April. So with that outlook on European policy this year, I will end my remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. And I'll turn to Lennart to see, do we have an interesting question for Peter that has arrived?
Yes, we do actually. This one question here for you, Peter. We are expecting yet another revised industry strategy this spring. Will it be specific on the supporting using wood in greening our buildings?
I think it will not be specific about wood in buildings, because we already had the renovation wave proposal last year, and we will have these various pieces of energy and climate legislation coming out in the course of the year. The Fit for 55 package is due in June, and that will cover all the climate and energy aspects. And then we will have a sustainable product initiative proposal coming out towards the end of the year. Mm-hmm. We will have an updated industrial strategy, and that is due to come out in March. And this will really build on the strategy we came out a year ago and take full account of the lessons we've learned from the COVID-19 crisis about how we can accelerate the twin transition of European industry towards being green, digital, and resilient. Well, twin is two things, green and digital. And we are going to take a particular close look at how we can help the energy-intensive industries to make that transition, as they form a very important part of the economy.
Well, thank you, Peter. Our next speaker is Stefan Lindbeck. Stefan is the CEO of the Lindbeck Group. So I'll say, hello, Stefan, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we definitely can. Good to see you and to hear you, Stefan. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
When I asked you to be part and present at this seminar, we had a bit of a discussion on which title to put on your part, and we agreed that you wanted to say, at Lindbäcks, we already walk the talk. So could you please say a few words about the Lindbäck Group and why you are walking the talk?
We are a family-owned company in 4th generation. We are almost 100 years old, with generation 3 zooming out and generation 5 zooming in. When I say walk the talk, I mean that we have a production facility, 2 factories that produces industrial-built housing for the Swedish market. We do it with about 500 employees, and we deliver turnkey projects. And it's mainly house for living, and it's for rental apartments, condominiums, hotels, elderly housing, and so on. And we do it in a 2 to 8 story high building, and we cover almost all of Sweden with our turnkey projects. And the things we do is mainly products that we produce in cooperation with the customer. So it is customer designed products. It's not products done from a catalog. So it's a cooperation.
Interesting. And when I visit your website, I learned a new expression, and I have to read this to make sure I get it right. Industrially produced apartment buildings, as one example. I'm not sure that our audience today fully understands what is meant by that, but luckily you have a very illustrative film that you have allowed us to show in this seminar. So let's roll this movie and learn a bit more about the systems that Lindbäcks delivers today.
Hi, I'm Henrik, and this is our factory. We are an industrial building company using wood from the northern forest, creating apartment buildings in Europe's most modern production facility. In a weather-protected environment, the volumes are built, step by step, along our preparation station and our main production line. Our building system can fill many different needs. We build everything from student housing, rent-controlled apartments to condominiums and retirement homes. We offer a full-service solution where we take responsibility for the entire process. This means security in terms of price, product and delivery times. Along the wall line, the exterior walls are put together. Here we assemble windows, bolt, insulate and paint. When the wall is ready, it proceeds to the main production line for assembling. In parallel, the partitions are built and roofed. Just as the exterior walls, they are fully finished when they are assembled. The main production flow begins with the construction of our floor structure. Then our composite bathroom is put in place and partitions are applied, as well as exterior walls and ceilings. The main production flow begins with the construction of our floor structure. Then our composite bathroom is put in place and partitions are applied, as well as exterior walls and ceilings. When all elements are put together, we install the kitchen and apply the floor surface layers and complete with plumbing. After that, we review the volume to ensure quality. In the last step, the module is sent to the automated warehouse. Here it's collected by an autonomous robot that loaded on the trucks. All that's left is delivering to the construction sites. Thanks to our industrial construction, we manage the resources efficiently and build climate and cost efficient with high security. We build industrial because we believe in creating homes for more people. We build industrial because we believe in living for more. We build industrial because we believe in living for the many.
That's a great movie, I must admit. I've watched it several times and I learned something new each time, Stefan.
Yeah.
So you claim that you are Europe's leading supplier of these solutions. So tell us, what markets are booming and why are they booming?
We produce, we deliver to Sweden mainly. We don't produce to other countries, not yet. The Swedish market is growing, and we have come to a position when about 20% of multifamily housing is done with wood frame in some way. Either it's a CLT structure, or in our case we have with wood frame. But what we see is that the demand has driven us to develop methods that we didn't think we could do. So as a supplier, we have been driving this production facility to a point where we can copy automotive industry, for example. And when we have a cooperation with suppliers, we try to engage ourselves in their environment to see how can we be a better customer for you, and how can you be a better supplier for us. So we try to reduce all the waste, so we don't touch the wood studs when they come to us. We just assemble them, and by cooperating with sawmills and other suppliers, we managed to reduce the waste to almost zero. And we haven't found that method to have stretched that far in any other building company. So therefore we claim ourselves to be number one in Europe. But we are open to have others to compete with us, and that's very, very important.
So my final question here, because then we're going to turn to Lennart and see what has arrived in his computer. But my final question, without telling any business secret, is this good business for Lindbäcks?
Lindbäcks is, as I mentioned, we are now 4th and 5th generation working, and we don't living on having very good revenues. We try to invest everything we have in our company, and we have a revenue that we can survive on. But it's not like cutting butter with a hot knife. It's extremely hard work. But if we all give ourselves hook together and help each other, and don't always try to find the highest revenues in every step. If we hook hands and work together, we can manage to make this planet survive, and be very delicate with how much we use, and don't waste material or humans or anything else.
Okay, well, good. Thank you, Stefan. I'm going to turn to Lennart. Do you have an interesting question for Stefan?
Yes, we do, Stefan. What attitudes do you meet from the construction sector in relations to your industrial solutions? Are you a threat to others?
I hope so. When we meet the competitors, it's mostly about material-wise, concrete and steel against wood. And we see ourselves as a game changer. Wood industry, particularly for large buildings, has been prohibited up to 1994. And in only 25 years, we have reached to 20% market share. And we see ourselves as a game changer. And it's like an accelerator to move quicker to solutions that are more carbon friendly. And that's how we are treated, and that's the way we think we need to be treated.
Thank you so much, Stefan. You've heard a lot about neat technical solutions. Another one is timber on top, which means that you build in wood on top of existing buildings. And to be inspired, let's have a look at this movie produced by the Swedish Institute as part of their Woodlife Sweden initiative.
This is the textile factory in Hammarby Sjöstad in Stockholm. It is almost 100 years old, but it doesn't at all look old. And that's because a modern 6-story extension has been put on top of it. A friendly parasite made out of wood and therefore light enough not to crush the 2-story brick building below. An innovative way of adding office space to a dense part of the city.
From the beginning, one of the visions was to make this old building something new and beautiful, and I think we have succeeded. You can tear a building down just because it's old and not functional. But we have taken care of this old building, and now it's living again, and it's beautiful to see.
I think the first reaction was like, wow, this is really nice. I can work here. It gives a warmth and just a coziness that I like.
Have you worked a lot with older buildings before?
This is about the oldest building I've worked with, but the assignment was to connect the 4 existing buildings and create one building with one entrance and with one atrium that was the heart of the whole complex.
Phenomenal. What a dramatic space.
Wood was chosen in order to keep the weight of the building down, and this reduced the amount of retrofitting of the existing building in order to support the new structure. Wood has a much smaller carbon footprint, for one. Furthermore, one of the advantages of using wood for the structure is that one can expose it on the interior and have it actually as the finished material. Here, the idea was to keep the palette quite narrow, focusing on the wood, the brick, and then everything else being very, very neutral. It's just a completely different feel going into a wooden building. Some of our tenants actually straddle between the wooden building and the concrete building, and walking from one half to the other, you can actually feel an acoustical change in the building, and there's a little more give in the wooden building, and the concrete building, it feels very abrupt somehow.
As more and more people move into the cities, space becomes more and more precious. And in order not to build in parks and squares, adding to existing buildings has become an alternative. Wood makes that possible, partly because it is a light material, but also because of the speed of construction. You don't have to close down traffic for long periods of time.
The environment working here, it's really inviting. The building itself has like such a unique personality. It's just like how the old can meet the new. And the smell, you would actually sit and then, oh wow, it just like it smells so good here. It's like it smells new, wood, you know. It invites you to be creative as well.
When you walk into the atrium, it's you get the feeling of bringing the outside in with you, and it's a little bit like one of those like meditative inhale, exhale moments. We use the atrium a lot. It's a good space for different activities, and we've had exhibitions, but also mostly students just kind of flow out there to have their lunch or to do some group works or to sit on the stairs and hang out.
Adding to an existing building might seem artistically limiting. The footprint is a given, you're bogged down by height regulations, even weight regulations. But I believe it's the opposite, because these structures, they might well help vitalize architecture. They allow for experiments. Here lies a freedom, an opportunity to investigate new construction techniques and new design typologies. It's a future well worth looking forward to.
Next speaker is Mr. Paul Brannan. Paul is Director of Public Affairs at CEBOA, which is the European Confederation of the Woodworking Industries. And Paul was earlier a member of the European Parliament between 2014 and 2019. Hello, Paul. How are you today?
Very well, Anna. Thank you.
That's excellent. And tell us, where are you? In northeast England, or?
I'm in the northeast of England, in Newcastle upon Tyne, and about only 50 miles from the border with Scotland. So a lot nearer to Scotland, where there are a lot of trees, than to London, where there are very few trees.
Well, that's good to hear. And representing the woodworking industries, you promised to tell us a bit more about how many of the European Green Deal objectives that your industries connect to. So please go ahead. The digital floor is yours.
Thank you. On the first slide, let's begin by reminding ourselves about the European Green Deal. The Green Deal aims to make Europe the world's first climate neutral continent by 2050, and it is in reality the EU's sustainable growth strategy. And in this diagram produced by the Commission, you can see 8 different policy areas which are identified in 8 separate green boxes. Now, from a wood perspective, the policy that stands out straight away is the one building and renovating in an energy and resource efficient way. But I'd also draw your attention to the policy mobilizing industry for a clean and circular economy. Next slide. Now, the two videos we have seen have highlighted the potential for wood, both in new build with the Culture Centre and in building on top and extending the textile factory in Stockholm, creating beautiful, energy efficient buildings with high levels of insulation and low levels of embedded energy. The wood, as well as storing carbon, is also substituting for materials such as steel and concrete, brick and block, which have high levels of carbon emissions associated with their manufacture. However, please note, with the EU's renovation wave pledging, as Peter said, to renovate 35 million EU homes by 2030, this market, the renovation market, is potentially much bigger for wood products than new build is. We need wood fiber insulation for roofs, wood panel insulation for walls, wood for floors, wood for doors, wood for window frames, etc. In fact, we quickly need some research in this area, research that does for the renovation wave what the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research did for new build in wood. The key question for this new research: what is the potential of the renovation wave to store carbon via the use of wood-based products? I'll repeat that. What is the potential of wood in the renovation wave to store carbon? And now I'd be very surprised if this potential wasn't greater than that of new build in wood. And maybe there's a role here for the new Bauhaus, given the initiative's stated intention and interest in sustainable building materials and in energy efficiency. And if we double glaze 35 million European homes with plastic window frames, not only will we have missed the opportunity to store carbon in 35 million multiple sets of wooden window frames, we will have generated a large amount of carbon emissions by using fossil fuels to make plastic or metal window frames. And a word on the Green Deal policy aim of mobilizing industry for a clean and circular economy. By using off-site factory production to construct prefabricated homes using wooden frames and materials, we can create homes in a cleaner way that generates less waste, unlike on-site construction, which generates large amounts of waste, much of which goes to landfill. Next slide. This slide illustrates how wood helps deliver a further two Green Deal policies: zero pollution and accelerating the shift to sustainable and smarter mobility. A main cause of air pollution is the particles of rubber shed by vehicle tires, especially by heavy goods vehicles, including those making deliveries to construction sites. Cement lorries, heavy. Delivery lorries carrying brick, block, steel, cement, concrete, heavy, 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 heavy. Timber is considerably lighter, hence far fewer deliveries. The Dalston Works in London was the world's largest cross-laminated timber building on completion. 10 stories, weighing only a fifth of a concrete building of the same size, and reducing the number of deliveries during construction by 80%. I'll say that again, reducing the number of deliveries during construction by 80%. Fewer deliveries means fewer particles, reduced fumes, less noise, less pollution, less CO2 emissions. Next slide. 3 more Green Deal policies helped by wood. European forests at 42% of the EU's land mass are critical to the Green Deal policy of preserving and restoring ecosystems and biodiversity, because biodiversity conservation is an agreed objective of sustainable forest management. Yes, deciduous trees deliver biodiversity, but conifer trees do so too. And conifer biodiversity is greater than many people think. See last year's report from Confor in the UK. If we also want the Green Deal policy from farm to fork, a fairer, healthier and environmental friendly farming system, then more trees on farms can help deliver this. For instance, the Republic of Ireland is in the process of doubling its forest cover, most of which is being planted on farmland. Clever planting, including agroforestry where appropriate, can increase crop yields and improve animal health, as well as increasing biodiversity. And an issue to consider, should we increase biomass production for energy on farms, as here in the bottom right slide at Cottbus in Germany, to substitute for forest-sourced biomass to enable more forest material to be used in long-life harvested wood products, say for use in the renovation wave? The growing demand for wood in construction can help further drive forest planting in EU countries with low forest cover. These forests in turn are good for biodiversity and potentially good for agriculture. For instance, it's difficult to see how we can green the cap without significantly more trees on farms. Finally, the Green Deal aim of clean, affordable and secure energy is being met in part with 40% of woody biomass that comes as a secondary raw material from the woodworking sector. And in turn, woody biomass generates 7% of all EU energy. And on the final side, we can conclude by looking down at the 8 policy areas of the European Green Deal and seeing that to a greater or lesser extent, the use of wood, especially in the EU building stock, will indeed help contribute to reaching multiple Green Deal objectives. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. You definitely broaden our perspective on using wood to green our buildings. It's amazing to see how many of the Green Deal objectives that it connects to. Let's turn to Lennart. A good question for Paul here.
Hello, Paul. We have one for you here. Using wood in greening our buildings, is that a truly European business, or is it mainly focused on certain member states?
Well, I think it is of relevance to all EU states. So yes, there's certain specific countries which are disproportionately, if you like, manufacturing the products, but they're being transported and sold on to all EU countries now. And so, I mean, the UK is a good example. We do not produce in the UK engineered timbers, but we're one of the largest users of engineered timbers. And I think that one of the things that will be interesting to see how it develops over time is as markets grow across the EU. And a recent report, which is just out, says that within a year, we're likely to see a doubling of CLT use across the EU.
Ja, men ta dem inte på en gång.
And we may well see other countries also starting to open up manufacturing facilities.
Thank you. Thanks to all 3 speakers. You've heard the speakers. You have hopefully been inspired by the movies. And now it's time for us to dig a little bit deeper into a more policy-oriented discussion. I remind you that you can still pose questions by using menti.com and the code that you see in front of you on the screen. And the way we're going to do this is that we're going to touch on a couple of different areas. And for each area, I start by making an argument which our panelists can then either agree on or disagree on, because the discussion is open. The first topic is using wood to mitigate climate change by substituting more carbon-intensive materials. And my argument here is that if we measure emissions over the full life cycle of a building, as we heard Peter say that the coming French law is intended to do, so if we measure the full life cycle emissions, meaning emissions from the materials used, emissions from the building period, and emissions from the use of the building, well then we believe that building in wood, and perhaps using bioenergy for heating and cooling, will come out very beneficial here. We heard you say, Peter, earlier that you don't expect the Commission to put forward any piece of policy which is preferential to wood. Instead, I assume that you could perhaps say that it should be technology neutral. But could you please elaborate on this? Why is it hard for the Commission to actually be preferential on the material to be used?
Can you hear me?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So because we don't always know the solutions today that will give us the answers we need 10, 20, 30 or 50 years down the road. So it's sometimes a bit of a mistake for the public sector to say it knows best. I think we need to leave a certain amount of space for innovation. And in some cases, this is breakthrough innovation. And that's why, as a general principle, the Commission tries to stay technology neutral. I think what we'll be trying to do through our Sustainable Product Initiative later this year is to develop a clear life cycle-based methodology for being sure just how much of embedded carbon or embedded emissions there is in a given product going on the European market. And I think this is the best way to compare one product against another. My unit is also responsible for many of the products which you're saying wood is better than, so steel, aluminium, cement. And I have to say that those sectors are also planning to develop breakthrough technologies which will substantially reduce their impact on climate greenhouse gas emissions. So I think all of the sectors producing materials for construction need to make the best possible efforts they can, and we will support this in a generally technology neutral manner.
Thank you, Peter. And just for the participants today, the reason that the picture of Peter was a little bit small is that he has some issues with the broadband connection from Brussels at the moment. But we're still very happy that you're here, Peter. So, tossing the initial or the question over to you, Paul, from the woodworking industry's perspective, are you okay with the sort of general approach and neutral versus materials that Peter just described, or would you like to see preferential policy?
Well, if we listen carefully to what Peter said there, and obviously Peter's in a diplomatically difficult position given the responsibilities of his department, but he did say that the other industries were planning. We're already there. We're already producing materials which, from a carbon perspective, are much more beneficial in the battle against climate change. Other industries hope to get there, but we're the one that's already there. And I think everyone needs to bear that in mind. And it's worth looking at this from a global perspective. While in many European countries the population is flatlining, there is not a housing crisis as such. Globally, the population is growing in countries like Brazil, India and Mexico. There is a housing crisis, and as the population grows in Africa, there's going to be a very big housing crisis. And if we build all of those people homes using traditional brick and block, concrete, steel, cement, then there's absolutely no way we can meet the global carbon targets, because, been said earlier in the event, we've got 11% of emissions coming from the construction industry globally. But if we factor in energy use in our buildings, then we're up to 40%. So the global housing crisis demands the need for wood to be used at a global level, not just at a European level.
So you're actually saying that it's going to sort itself out because we already walk the talk in the woodworking industries. At least that's my words to summarize.
Well, I think it's the decisions. People, when they make decisions about what to build out of, need to consider the impact on the environment of the materials that they're going to use. And as it currently stands, wood comes out scoring very highly on many categories to do with tackling climate change.
Let's turn to Stefan, because as we said before, you already walk the talk at Lindbäcks. So would you be helped? Would you like to see preferential policy which sort of points directly towards wood, or how do you want to compete with the other materials?
I'm not interested in having material specified regulations. I'm very open to that we have to compete on the same basis. So I'm signing on the initiative to have an open field to compete. But what I want is to have a clear regulation system. So we who use, depending on what material we use, we want to be sure that we have the same way of calculating the footprint, so we can compete on our own way. We don't want any subsidy system. We would like to have more competitiveness, and therefore we know that the end user and the customers are smart, so we have to compete with our own strength.
Thank you. Interesting indeed. I'm not going to bring in any questions at this point. I'll wait for them for slightly later in the discussion. Instead, we're going to move to our next topic, which is using wood to contribute to a circular economy. And once again, I start with an argument. I'm saying that for the European Union to be the first climate-neutral continent, we know that we need to move to a more circular and, I would say, bio-based economy. And we've heard already that using wood to green our buildings fits perfectly well into several of these aspects. But Stefan, you're going to go first here. You mentioned when you spoke a lot about reducing waste, but when we saw your movie, it seems that a lot of your solutions are based on what I would call fresh material. So explain a bit more, how do you contribute to increased circularity?
By using fresh material that is designed by order, we managed to reduce the amount of waste that normally is produced on the building site. So with great connections to suppliers, we can have them to pre-cut and pre-drill and do most of the manufacturing of the wood species. Then we can only assembly in the lines, or we can reduce the amount of waste. And if the sawmill is working with the things they are good at, cutting and drilling and adjusting timber, they can use the debris to heating or to other things. If we would have that, we would have it as a waste, and it's not valuable for us to use that kind of waste. So therefore we stand behind everything that is connected with the more circular use. And since we only use about 16% of the forests that is used in Sweden, at least 16% goes to producing buildings. We are very, very keen on those 16% must be used very, very delicate, so we don't overuse and over-design and overuse the timber. So we use as little timber as we possibly can. And we also tried to reduce the amount of insulation produced from mineral and glass. So therefore we tried to exchange insulation to cellulose isolation from reused newspaper, for example.
Well, thank you. Bouncing the question over to you, Paul, the description you heard from Stefan, would you say that's generic for the woodworking industries? Or what's the sort of overall position in your industries concerning circularity?
Just need to bear in mind just historically how much waste has been produced by the construction industry, how much of that ultimately ends up in landfill. And I think while we all get very excited about building new in wood, wherever possible, we need to renovate existing buildings rather than build new buildings. And that's about retrofitting, it's about renovating, it's about extending, it's about building on top. And we know that wood's a great material to do that, not least because it's light. So if you were to build an extension on top of a 1960s office block using concrete, you might be able to get 1 or 2 stories on from a structural point of view. But if you build in wood, you might be able to get 5, 6, 7 stories on top. One of the reasons for that is many of our 1960s, 70s and 80s buildings were over-engineered as office blocks because they were designed to have a large number of heavy filing cabinets on every floor. Filing cabinets have now disappeared from offices the world over because everything's stored in the cloud. But that weight being removed from the foundations frees up structurally the opportunity to, in this case, build on top. And wood's the ideal material, as Stefan well knows from the fact that he's doing it.
So Peter, over to you. You get the chance to sort of summarize this topic. So would you see that the woodworking industries are lagging behind on circularity? Are they average versus others? Or might they even be in the lead?
Well, I think they're in the lead, actually. I think there's 3 points to make here. Firstly, no one's making any more iron ore or precious metals on the planet. It's a finite resource, but that is absolutely not the case for wood. You can continue to renew and restore the amount of wood that we can use infinitely. Secondly, it is by definition a product that can be used to make all sorts of things, which at the end of their life can be safely recovered and recycled, as Paul and Stefan have said. But thirdly, I would say that there's a huge responsibility on people who are designing products to start thinking about circularity through design, because it's not just a question of identifying potential for recycling. It's about planning ahead and being able to identify materials that you can use for a long period of time, but then afterwards use safely in other product uses.
Okay. Well, thank you to all three of you. We are moving on to the next topic, and this time, why using wood to green our buildings is contributing to a resilient EU economy. And my argument this time is the following. The corona pandemic has shown all of us how important it is that we have a resilient EU economy. I argue that using wood to green our buildings contributes a lot already today to this resilience. It's about sourcing mainly in Europe. It's about building in Europe for Europeans. It's about creating jobs all over Europe. In other words, even here, where you could say that the woodworking industries is a role model. So on this one, you go first, Paul. First of all, do you share my argument that the woodworking industries is very beneficial for the economic resilience? And secondly, how well known, appreciated is this in the Brussels context?
I think you're correct. It's evident from the change of leadership in the United States that climate change has just shot back up the agenda from an American perspective. And yesterday we had the US saying that climate change is an existential threat to the US, and it's primarily a threat to all our economies. So by preparing for climate change and attempting to mitigate it, we're helping to protect the economy. One of the things that we haven't mentioned so far is around health and well-being. I mean, all economies are underpinned by their workforce, and we need to have a healthy European workforce. There needs to be a healthy global workforce. And there's a growing body of scientific evidence that by having homes and workplaces made from wood, we end up with healthier people. These are good environments in which to live and work, and evidence mounting that maybe academic attainment in schools and universities made from wood is slightly higher than if other materials are used. And one where financially huge sums of money potentially flow is if it's the case that a wooden hospital was on average to have a 1 night less occupancy stay. So rather than 5 nights, it came down to 4 nights. You roll that out across the whole of Europe over a sustained period of time, then the sum of money that would be saved by our collective health services is huge, which in turn is money which is saved from an economic point of view. So I think there's multiple benefits. I think there's a realization about climate change benefits at an EU Brussels level, but some of the other benefits, such as healthier workplaces and healthier homes, that is only just beginning to trickle through, which is in part, to be fair, due to the fact that the evidence in this area is only just beginning to mount up.
So there's more to come, in other words. Stefan, do you wake up in the morning up in Piteå in the north of Sweden and you instantly think, how do I contribute to a resilient EU economy? Or are you driven by other factors?
I'm not, I don't think I woke up and think about European economy every morning. But when I think about economy, I think it's a global thing that we need to. It feels like we are in the beginning of how to use material in a smarter way, and not just maximize the revenues from what we do. And I know that shareholder is eager to have profits, but we need to take a little bit step back and realize where we are at. How do we use the material the smartest way? Can we put concrete where we need it the most? Can we put steel and wood where we need it the most, with respect for the nature, with respect for the coming generations? So in a financial way, economy way, I would say that take a little care of what we're doing, so we can try to contribute in the best way. Since we heard earlier today that we use 2 globes in every year instead of 1, as we only have. So I think it's important to listen to resources of facts, engineers and scientists, and how do we develop this. It's not just a financial thing. It's a way of treating the planet the smartest way.
Well, thank you for sort of bringing the perspective slightly larger than the economic, because you are perfectly right on that, of course, Stefan, that we need to look at sustainability as all 3 pillars. Peter, you get the final word on this topic. So I assume that you, as head of unit for energy-intensive industries and raw materials, that you can stand up and defend the woodworking industry's impact on resilience every day. But to what extent do you feel that the general perception within the Commission is in line with what we've spoken here?
Well, I probably do wake up every day thinking about how we can become more resilient and autonomous in Europe, because it's the global geopolitics are becoming quite unpredictable. And I would say that clearly the wood sector is extremely well positioned compared to many other sectors, because so much of the resource is here in Europe. The supply chains are shorter because they're largely within Europe, and the jobs and the investment are taking place in Europe. So I just wish that many of the other sectors that I'm dealing with could demonstrate as much resilience and strategic autonomy as the wood sector can.
That takes us to the 4th topic of today, which is the perception of wood. My argument this time is that using wood to green our buildings is perceived as something positive by most people in Brussels, as we have heard several of our speakers mention. But the attitude versus other wood-based products can be very different, even though they are produced from the same tree. And this is intriguing to me, and also to many others in the forest-based value chains, because we know that this is a long value chain, or using Peter's language, industrial ecosystem, where all different parts are connected to each other. Well-managed forests supply sawmills. Side streams from sawmills, as we heard Lennart say in the beginning, is essential for pulp and paper and other products. And side streams from all parts of the value chain are essential for bioenergy. So we also know, who work in the industry, that for the economics to work for this whole value chain, if you take your bits and pieces out, it's not going to be the way that you thought it could deliver. So on this one, you're going to go first, Peter. This holistic perspective that I'm asking for in all types of policy development in Brussels, how can we assure that jointly? I'm not just saying that it's the task of the Commission, but also from us stakeholders. How can we jointly assure that we don't get policies driving in different directions or even being contradictory to each other, affecting this value chain?
Well, this is part of the method of working that the Commission tries to do everything through better regulation. So impact assessments, bringing all the relevant services together, public consultations to make sure we really engage with stakeholders. These are some of the ways we can try to make sure that we develop the best policy possible. But if your question is about the perception of wood in the Brussels bubble, well, then I say go back to where we started this meeting, because you've heard it from the top of our organisation. the President of the European Commission has said in unequivocal language she sees a very important role for organic materials like wood in creating a better living and working environment for the European citizen.
And should we interpret that she's equally positive to the pulp and the paper and the wood-based textiles and the biofuels that come out of the same tree?
I think you should wait for her next year's State of the Union speech.
I would be delighted if she would speak up on that topic as well. Paul, what's your view on this, the perception of wood versus other parts of the products coming out of the same tree in Brussels bubble?
Well, my experience, particularly in my time as a member of the Parliament, was there is, and there's no way around this, there is a kind of hierarchy of perception of the use of wood. And long life harvested wood products, the making of something out of wood which then lasts for an exceedingly long time, possibly storing carbon for longer than it was actually growing in the tree, are seen across the board as a good thing. And that would include environmental organizations saying using wood to build houses is a good idea. And then at the other end of the spectrum, the shorter the life of the wood product or the wood-based product, then the more potential criticism there is. And I think we're all well aware of the fact that the burning of wood for energy is one where there are a lot of question marks. So I think you have to pick your product, and it'll lie somewhere on that linear line between wood in construction for a very long period of time through to a very short life if the product is going to be, wood's going to be burnt, and everything in between. And I think making the argument that this in some ways is a kind of whole system is one of the things that we need to get across to politicians. But again, and this is a challenge to us, is the basically daily advances of what the bioeconomy can do with woody feedstock is such that there are more and more products that can be made, more and more of them are long life, and therefore a question mark is going to continually be put next to the short life products. So we've got some challenges there to think through how we're going to deal with that, which was why I floated out in my contribution whether or not we need to think about producing more biomass for fuel on farms rather than forests, freeing up what is grown in the forests to go wherever possible into long life products. And the renovation wave opens up a huge area. So we know that wood fiber going into insulation board, it's not appropriate to make sawn timber out of that, but it could go into a material which could lag the loft of a house for the next 100 years and store carbon for the next 100 years. And if you juxtapose that with burning it, then more people are going to say in the Brussels bubble, let's put it into wood fiber in insulation in lofts rather than burning it. So we've got some challenges in this area.
But can we agree between the two of us that hygiene products, especially toilet paper, are truly essential? We saw that in the spring of last year, didn't we? So let's not put the short-lived products, all of them, in the same basket, I might say. Stefan, you're going to go last on this. You are, in one extent, part of this long industrial ecosystem that Peter talked about before. Can you tell us a bit about, the regional connections that you have up north, how you work regionally, how you experience being part of this value chain?
We have very tight connections with supplier, and they are very, very important for us to even exist. We can't transport the lumber very long distances. And the connection that we have with the university and the academia is extremely important. So I would highlight the need of connection with the academia to grow a better understanding in processes and how to use material in a smart way. And it's very, very important to remember that. But what I would like to point out also is, since we talk of the Brussels policy landscape, my message is that remember to base the policy making on facts. It's not about assumptions and things we feel like this. And we need to since we're dealing with policies, and we as an entrepreneur and a company, we are obliged to follow the guidelines and the codes. So the code settings must be followed by thoroughly gone through facts that are for real, so we don't miss targets in the future. So academia, connection to supply system, very, very tight, and base policies on facts.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you to all three of you. It is definitely time now to turn to Lennart to see what do we have in the inflow of questions. And in an ideal world, you can give me three, one for each speaker, please. Is that possible?
It's possible. It's possible. We have an inflow of questions here, and I start with the questions to Peter here. It says that the forest-based industry have also increased move to the biorefineries that can support material innovations and also the new aesthetics of Bauhaus. What support wood constructions needs from the wood-based biorefineries?
That was for you, Peter.
Well, we've identified. Yep, thank you. We've identified in the new European bioeconomy strategy a key role for the biorefineries. I think we would like to see a very large increase in the number of these refineries around Europe, and they do contribute enormously to the circular economy. And they can also produce all sorts of innovative materials which can then be used in a variety of end applications, whether it be in buildings or in textiles or in pharmaceuticals even. So I think the answer is there's no limit on what can be done with that. It depends on the capacity of researchers to find products for which there is going to be a market. And with the way that the European economy is going to be transitioning very quickly towards climate neutrality and circularity, I think there's huge potential for things that we can't even imagine today.
Thank you very much, Peter.
So who goes next?
Yes, and here we go to Stefan. You have already touched upon this, but still, what is the core? How do you assure that your solutions are sustainable?
I can't ensure everything, but I can assure that I do everything in my power, everything in my organization to do the best as we know today. We have an organization that is based on continuous improvements, and by doing continuous improvements with respect for sustainability, I know I do the best I can, and I do products that are making lesser and lesser footprints on the planet, and that makes me comfortable when I go to bed every evening.
Very nice, thank you. And last questions to Paul about challenges.
Yes, I'm ready.
What or who is the main challenge? Is it other materials or the policy landscape?
It's a good question, and we spend a lot of time discussing this. I think as long as the products used in construction in particular are viewed in the broadest sense of what is their climate and wider environmental impact in all ways. So referencing back to what I spoke about in my contribution, is the weight of materials needs to be borne in mind because it increases the number of deliveries to site, which in turn exacerbates air pollution, as I explained. Now, as I currently understand it, this is the kind of thing which simply isn't measured when the environmental impact of the construction of a building is considered. So when something goes at a municipal level for approval, for planning approval to be built, these kind of things are not being considered. And we think there just needs to be a much broader consideration of the impact of the materials used, which seems to me only fair and sensible, particularly as we struggle with climate change. And that if you have that broad consideration of the impact of the use of materials, then not on every score and not in every way, then wood would then perform strongly in consideration. And I don't think any of us on this panel or involved in this event today wouldn't also say there is obviously a place for hybrid use of materials in buildings. Concrete is an ideal material to make a foundation for a wooden building with. Some of the tallest wooden buildings in the world need to have a heavy material halfway up to stop the building swaying too much in the wind, as is the case with the student building in Vancouver, which for a while was the tallest wooden building in the world. Halfway up, it had a concrete floor and it has concrete lift shafts. There is a place for steel in the joints of wood for glulam and CLT, etc. So we want a hybrid approach, but in that taking a step backwards when the building is on the drawing board and we're considering its impact from a climate change and an environmental point of view, let's have that done in its fullest sense.
Well, thank you to you, Lennart. You're going to bring one more question in at the end to Erik, so just to pick one while I speak to him. And thank you to all three panelists. I especially want to thank you for being quite bouncy and quick and having a bit of a tempo in the discussions. I think that's very beneficial for the participants. It's now time for me to welcome Erik Bergqvist back again. Hello, Erik.
Hello.
You've been listening to the discussions and the debate. If you were to define your three main takeaways from what you've heard, what would they be?
Well, first, I think it's fascinating. I've been engaged in the forestry and wood so long, but still there are new things to discover. The first I would say is, and I would use the word from Stefan, game changer. We are in a new phase now when it comes to using wood, finding new ways, refining. So something is truly happening, or it already has happened, how to use wood, and also in a new climate changing way. The second is that there are so many details. And for example, one I had no idea that when you build a construction, that you need less transport because wood is lighter. So there are many aspects, positive aspects actually of using wood in construction, and of course in other ways as well. And the third is that we are now getting really, I would say, heavy legislation. For example, this life cycle law in France. And France, it's not just any country, it's the second largest country in the EU. So that will, of course, have an impact. And something I have been wanting for a long time, that you look at the whole life cycle when you do constructions and things like that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Erik. I have a few more questions to you. You're being a member of European Parliament, so you're part of the political decision-making system. So if you were to define what you can do on a short term, perhaps already next week or next month, versus what you can do in the longer term perspective to promote using wood to green our buildings, what would that be? Could you give the audience a feeling for, what can you do in that daily political work that keeps going on in the Parliament?
Well, political work is usually quite long term, but I would say one thing, and I think there is a mission for a lot of us to actually learn more and spread the information about what is happening now in the wood sector. And also in Europe, we have so very different both experiences and perception of what the forestry is and what wood is. From my parts of the world, it's quite positive, but I know from other parts of Europe they have more negative experiences of wood and forestry and things like that. So I think we need to spread information that it can be very sustainable. It can be, and it will be, a huge help for us in fighting the climate change, for example. So I think that's what to do in the short term, is actually try to spread the knowledge about what you can do with wood, and that there are many good aspects of wood that aren't commonly known in that sense. And
my final question to you, you come from the north of Sweden, You said in your opening address that you grew up in the forest, more or less. That's very much my story as well. We have this natural connection to forests. We know that we replant them after harvesting. We know that we have increased the amount of forest, almost doubled it in Sweden in the last 100 years or so. But this is knowledge that you and I have in our DNA, more or less, because we were born with it and raised with it. So what do we need to do from the industry side, but also you as an MEP, to sort of, I wouldn't say educate, but to bring this message to more people, more Europeans from other parts of Europe? Otherwise, maybe this would remain a bit of a Swedish or a Finnish debate. So what's your view on this?
Well, seminars like this, for example, but to talk about it and also to be inviting to we can have webinars, but when we start to be able to travel, as always, to invite people, groups to visit and see how things are doing, because sometimes you really have to see it just to believe it. But also, I think we have to both think, why have we succeeded? What are the mechanisms? And explain the importance of certain mechanisms, certain legislation to be there, actually to be successful. I would say one thing in Sweden is that we have a lot of forest owners who really care about their forest. And we shouldn't forget that they make a profit out of the forest. So you have to keep it profitable. And I would say the best way to get more trees planted and grown, it is actually to get even more value in every tree that is planted and in some years harvested as well. So we have to find more use for wood that will make it even more in demand in Europe and in the world. And also have legislation that says, okay, this is it. And you can look at the Nordic countries. It has been very successful for hundreds of years.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. And once again, thank you for hosting today's event and for being one of the hosts for the network. I'm going to turn to Lennart now. Do we have an interesting question for Eric here at the end?
Yes, Eric. We have one here, bearing in mind that you are part of the S&D political group in the parliament. It says, how is wood construction discussed within your party group?
That's interesting.
Yes, that's interesting. No, I would say we have different opinions based on different experience, but also different roles in our group. So I would say there is no agreement about all these kind of things, and we haven't been discussing wood buildings actually very much, but. I see it will be more, and it must be more discussed now when we get the forest strategy, because then we really, really have to get into these questions. And I think we had a really good report from the Agri committee with a very balanced view on forestry, and also where we should put the competence for the forestry. And in my view, it's good that the EU is engaged, putting forward certain things, certain legislation. But basically and mainly, this has to be a national competence, because it is so very different, forestry and the possibilities for forestry in Europe. So it should be a national competence.
Thank you, Eric. And ladies and gentlemen, this takes us to the end of this event. We do hope that you have found the discussions interesting and that we have managed to give you one or two new insights. We would very much like to get your spontaneous reactions on this event, whether you thought it was good or bad. It's free for you to do any comments, and you do it using menti.com. I hope you're used to that system by now. We will look forward to welcoming you back to another Would Be Better event later this spring. And until then, we would like to say, do take care. Please stay safe. And Lennart, it is time for us to say goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.